over at our sister school Onaway just down the street. The next in our series is scheduled for January 20th, so please mark your calendars accordingly and be on the lookout for that. Before we go any further, I just want to take this opportunity to thank the Shaker PTO and community builders for sponsoring the speaker series. I do want to be sure and let everybody know that we are recording this evening's session for those who are unable to attend. Tonight, we are extremely fortunate to be hearing from Dr. David Glasner, Superintendent of the Shaker Heights City Schools. And in just a moment, Dr. Glasner is going to open with a few remarks, which will be followed by questions submitted from the community in advance of this meeting. After that, and as time allows, Dr. Glasner will address questions submitted during the course of the session. And while we'll do our best to get to as many questions as time allows, please know that if we don't get to your question this evening, we'll do our best to get you an answer in the days ahead. Dr. Glasner previously served as interim principal of Shaker Heights High School. He also served as the executive director of curriculum and instruction, as well as principal of Shaker Heights Middle School. Prior to coming to Shaker, Dr. Glasner served as a principal and social studies teacher in New York City. He holds a BA and an MA in history from the University of Pennsylvania, as well as a master's degree in social studies education from Teachers College, Columbia University. Dr. Glasner earned his doctorate in urban education at Cleveland State University. He and his wife, Alana, who is a math teacher, have 3 children. Thank you for joining us this evening, Dr. Glasner, and at this time, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Neil. Much appreciated. It is great to see everybody virtually this evening. Big thank you to the PTO for sponsoring this. And before I get started, I do just want to make a couple of opening remarks. First of all, I think when we first settled on the day for this event, we did not imagine that it was going to be the day before we have students return on site after 7 months, or on a night when we still have an undecided election on our hands. So I appreciate everybody taking time out of your day with everything else going on to spend time to be part of this conversation. I also really want to thank everybody who has been involved in all of the hard work over the past 7 months. I know that list is endless, but on the eve of bringing students back after so much time away from our school buildings, I really want to thank our teachers who have been working really above and beyond to respond to all of the changes in how we think about education, how we envision education, to our administrators who have put in many days and months and hours and minutes preparing for all of the changes in education and the school settings that we've seen since the pandemic started, and all of the other staff and faculty that have helped carry us through the pandemic, our custodians, our administrative assistants, our transportation department. The list really goes on and on. And of course, thank you to our community for your willingness to be patient, for providing input, for your support throughout all of the pandemic. We know that tomorrow is really just another step in the flexibility and fluidity that we've all had to demonstrate over the past 7 months. There are a couple of other things I just want to mention. In terms of tomorrow, a lot of information has come out over the past few days. We know it's a lot. Normally when we're transitioning to school from the summer, we have a little more time to get information out. If you ever have any questions about information that you need to get for yourself or for others, please don't hesitate to reach out to either building principals or district administrators. We are more than happy to help. I also want to take this moment just to ask for everybody's patience and grace and flexibility as we move toward the next transition. We know from our experiences over the past 7 months that whenever we have a transition like this, there is a learning curve. We know that our teachers have done an amazing job learning about and strengthening and revising what remote learning looks like. And we expect that to be the case with what we call concurrent learning, where classrooms will be live streamed on site and online. We also know that students who are online will continue to have access to a great education. And one of the things that we heard repeatedly as we planned for this next transition is that the relationships that students and teachers have already built over the past few months has been invaluable. And we know that that's been an important factor in our decision making. Last thing I just want to mention is our school nurses have started a community campaign called Stop the Spread. We know that in order to keep our students in person and on site, it will literally have to take a community effort. And so you'll be hearing more about this over the next couple of days and weeks, but we really encourage you to advocate in our community for everybody to maintain safe and healthy practices, because that really will have an impact on our ability to keep on-site learning happening and continuous. I am sure I will go over other details and happy to answer other questions that come up. I know there are some questions that we got in advance, and to the extent possible, happy to answer also questions that come up in the chat. But again, thank you everybody for being here, and I look forward to our conversation this evening.
Very good. So let's start. The Shaker Heights Parent-Teacher Organization is dedicated to facilitating the active and informed involvement of all parents and families to achieve the educational success and well-being of all children. Can you please explain why a strong PTO is important to the success of our school community, and what role you see the PTO playing this year as we navigate this challenging environment?
Absolutely. Actually, to answer this question, I'm going to stretch back in time to when I first came to this district. I was a principal in New York. I think Neil mentioned that, and was preparing for my move to Shaker Heights. And as part of that, I had a chance to speak with the PTO president of the middle school at the time, or the co-president. And we had a conversation, and the schools that I had been involved with up until that point had not really had such extensive parent support. And so when I heard about how involved and supportive the PTO was in Shaker, I was really blown away. I mean, I really, honestly, I didn't even believe it. I mean, I thought the PTO co-president was just kind of maybe over-exaggerating a little bit on what the PTO does in Shaker Heights. And that was, my impression was blown out of the water when within a couple of weeks, I think, of starting, we had our first rainbow run at the middle school, raised, I think, upwards of $20,000 or $30,000. And more importantly, the whole community came out. And I could really see how involved and important the parental involvement in our PTO is to our schools here. Here in Shaker, our PTO ensures that parents have a regular means to provide input in our schools, that there is a way to support our schools. And I'm not just talking about financial support. I also mean in terms of giving feedback, in terms of sharing with the community at large what we do in our schools. And also our PTO has really been instrumental in helping to push our district to continue to evolve and better meet our students' needs. Another example I will give is the work that we do, our I3 initiative, which really focuses on STEM education, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, design thinking, and making sure that students have access to modern technology and collaborate with teams to solve real world problems. I know that my first introduction to those conversations really came through the PTO. Parents who work in our community or in our region have an understanding of the kinds of skills that our students need to be successful in the modern workforce. And members of our PTO brought those conversations to the forefront. And as a result, we now have our Shaker Schools Foundation I3 initiative. So really there are many, many different examples I could give. I think in the pandemic, the importance of the PTO has only been magnified because it's really important that we have a two-way street of communication and engagement. And I know in my role now, I talk with Stacy and Sarah pretty frequently, our PTO Council co-presidents, because they are able to provide information and feedback about what's happening in the community, what the needs are in the community. And I'm also able to share an update on things that are happening in our school district that they can share more broadly. So those are just some of the examples. Neil and everybody else, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. I know that we have other administrators on this call, so if there's anything you want to add of your own experiences, please feel free to add.
I do think that our communication with the PTO two-way has never been higher, and I appreciate you, Dr. Glasner, encouraging us to meet regularly with the PTO. I'm having another coffee talk tomorrow morning, 9:30, just a shameless plug for Boulevard. But all of the principals are doing that on a regular basis, and I think it's really been helpful to get that two-way communication in place. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Speaking of communication, it is so important, probably now more than ever. How might the PTO help with communications to ensure that we're reaching all of our families at this time?
Great question. Really, one of the best ways is to help answer questions and serve as an individual contact point for families who have additional questions or need additional information. As a school district, I know we try our best to get everything out there, put everything on our website, send text messages and emails, but we know that there are always gaps in that communication. And as members of our PTO, you're often up to speed on information or know who to ask what questions to. So when people come to you, it is always helpful if you can provide answers or direct them to the people that can provide those answers. I think more broadly, this year we have experimented quite a bit with the district and PTO communications. Our newsletters have changed a little bit. The way we share PTO information has changed a little bit. That's a result of a long conversation with our PTO about how we can merge and meld the communications that the district and the PTO share. I expect that those communications will continue to happen and that we'll revise our communications to make sure they're even better at serving the needs of our community.
A parent asked about Caring Schools Community. Please explain what this program is and what it looks like at the pre-K4 level.
Sure, and again, I would encourage, I know Neil, you have a great deal of experience with this, so I'm happy to start, but I'm sure you have more to add. The Caring Schools Community is a social and emotional learning curriculum. It was developed through an organization called CASTLE, and I don't remember exactly what it stands for, but CASTLE is really a leader in helping develop social and emotional curriculum and supports to be implemented in school settings. We have recognized over the past few years that we have to be very intentional about developing and providing support for social and emotional learning skills. And really some of that I think has always been necessary. I think in the modern age, some of that is even more necessary with student access to social media, and the way information flow happens is very different now than it used to. And so we've really seen a need to be even more intentional about social and emotional learning and skill development. There are elements of the Caring School Community that, again, I know Neil can talk to, but they include having structures like community circles or community meetings, identifying topics in advance. Usually there's a set kind of curriculum and you plan for specific topics to be covered, and really to allow a forum for students and teachers to build positive relationships and learn skills that are going to carry them through not only their educational career, but life beyond their K-12 educational career. And again, Neil, feel free to jump in. You are way more of an expert in this than I am.
I will just say that you're likely to have seen this at the pre-K4 level at the morning and afternoon meetings each day that the kids participate in. And I know that during those times, the students are learning how to just do things like set class norms and goals for the class. That they learn skills like decision-making and how to identify and solve problems. So I also just want to say that it really does complement our positive behavior interventions and supports program, which each of the K4 buildings have in place already. So that was one of the reasons that we went with Caring School Community, because it does work so well with what was already in place for us. Just as Dr. Glasner said, during those meeting times, the students are engaged in meaningful conversations with their teachers in classrooms and developing relationships. And over the course of the time, that they're learning to do things like identify and express their feelings, and also just important social skills like carrying on conversations. And like Dr. Glasner said, we've always had a little bit of this to do, but with social media and things, it just seems more prevalent than ever. Just having kids take turns when they speak with one another and calling each other by name and looking each other in the eye when they speak to someone. That's all the things that go into caring school community. So while the daily meetings sometimes seem quick, they're actually very intentional in their content, and like drops in a bucket, they actually end up filling that bucket up over time. So just wanted to say that.
If you don't mind, I would like to add to that, Neil. Thank you, Dr. Glasner, for allowing us to chime in on this as well.
George, go ahead and introduce yourself, Mr. Clark.
I'm sorry, yeah, that's rude. Yeah,
no.
George Clark, I'm the principal at Lomond. Thank you, Neil. Real quick, the other thing is, yeah, we have these allocated times, you know, to go through that curriculum, which is partially scripted in a manner of like direct instruction, if you will. But to see it carry over into recess or other formats throughout, or other engagements that are happening throughout the course of the day, and the students are reflecting on things that they learned as it relates to their social emotional development, is even more intriguing for me. So to see the carryover and how it relates to different incidents and situations that happen throughout the course of the day, lets us know and informs us that this is a powerful curriculum that we need to continue to implement with fidelity. So that's what we plan to do.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? All right. In addition to caring schools community, Dr. Glasner, how is the district supporting our community's social and emotional well-being? The question was asked, what support services are in place and how can families access them?
Thanks. You know, this question brings up a great point, which is we know that it's not just our students that are quote unquote sitting right in front of us that need support, especially during pandemic times. We know that our families at large need additional supports. Our Family and Community Engagement Office, led by Keith Langford, has really taken the lead in providing those supports. You may see in some of the surveys that we've distributed over the past few months, we often include questions related to families who might need additional support, whether that's social and emotional support or other supports. Keith Langford is one of the people who helps put families in touch with those supports. We also have different staff members, support staff members at the K-4 level and beyond, that provide students and families with support. I know, for example, at the K-4 level, we now have a social worker who I've heard fantastic things about, who is there to provide support services for students and families as needed. We also have other personnel. Ms. Billy at Lomond is somebody who's very closely connected with our community and whose work largely falls into the Family and Community Engagement Office work. So those are just some of the examples. I will say, I will continue to plug, if any families are in need of additional support, please do not hesitate to reach out to our district, either the district office or to your building administration, because we do have access to resources that we can provide. I would also like to just give a shout out to some of our partners in this work. The district works closely with the Shaker Heights Youth Center, as well as Belfair and other social service agencies to provide additional supports to our students and families.
I want to reiterate what you said, Dr. Glasner. We have a wealth of resources available, and sometimes I think one of the most difficult parts is knowing when a particular resource is needed. So please, any families, just reach out. And it's one more reason why the relationships that we form with our students and our families is so important, so that they feel comfortable knowing that we are here for them and that they can reach out when they have a need. Another topic that we're going to be discussing tonight is detracking. The question came up, how is the district implementing detracking at the pre-K-4 level? For example, have there been any changes in practices and procedures this year?
Thanks for that question. And, you know, the work around detracking really falls more broadly under the umbrella of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Just to give a little more context, our board approved an educational equity policy, I want to say now 2.5 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And the district approved its 5-year strategic plan right before the pandemic hit, which is based off of our educational equity policy and the International Baccalaureate Framework. And what all of those things have in common is that as a district, we really strive to make sure that we are that we are meeting the needs of all students. And that means that we are challenging all of our students, that we're providing all of our students with access to a rich and robust and education and curriculum, and that our work is inclusive of all students from all different backgrounds. In terms of tracking specifically, up until this year, really, we had a great deal of tracking students by course level. It really started most visibly in 5th grade, where students were divided into advanced and grade level course levels. What we saw here in Shaker was certainly not unique to Shaker, but I would say it was also very pronounced in Shaker, which is that we saw as students were divided into tracks that really those divisions existed along racial lines, generally speaking, with very few exceptions. And also that once a student was placed in a track, those tracks generally lasted throughout a student's educational career. And determinations for those tracks really were made formally by 4th grade, but often informally earlier than that. So we were just to make this clear, we were setting students' pathways for their K-12 educational career that would last through 12th grade, generally at the 3rd or 4th grade level. At the elementary level, at the primary level, tracking has not been quite as pronounced or as explicit as it has been at our secondary school buildings. We have learned over the past few years, particularly with the International Baccalaureate Program, that it is important to be able to differentiate in a classroom, meaning we're providing individualized supports and enrichments and instruction for students in a classroom. Our International Baccalaureate coordinators have helped to lead that effort, and we've experimented with ways of having our International Baccalaureate coordinators come into classrooms instead of pulling students out of classrooms. That way they have more access to more students, and they can also provide models and additional supports for the general classroom teacher. We know that it's important for all of our students to be engaged in challenging, real-world, collaborative curriculum, and we think that is where we are headed. I will say, of course, like with anything new, there are learning experiences that we're going to have that will help shape what we do in the future. This year, of course, is incredibly unique. The reason we moved forward with tracking across all grade levels at the secondary level in kind of such a short amount of time, it's something that we firmly believe in and something that our strategic plan calls for us to do. But of course, the pandemic and the structures that we had to put in place to make sure that we had the option of returning students on site played a role in how this was rolled out. I will say that over the course of this year, I expect that we will be continuing to communicate and engage families in discussions around detracking, share experiences from students, teachers, administrators, and others about what school used to look like and what it looks like now, and continue to make modifications and to revisions to our curriculum and the curricular structures as we move past the pandemic. So I hope that answers the question. Again, principals, feel free if there are specific experiences that you want to discuss, feel free to add to that.
I will share an example that we're kind of excited about at the K-4 level. Over the past year, I'd say 1.5 years, we've been actively working to transform the role of our IB coordinators at the elementary schools. Traditionally, at a number of the K-4 schools anyway, we've had more of a traditional pull-out model of enrichment that benefited some and not necessarily all. And so we're evolving that traditional model of enrichment for a few into more of a push-in model that will provide enrichment opportunities for everyone. So our IB coordinators are now working closely with teachers to support differentiated instruction, as Dr. Glasner spoke of, with a focus on inquiry in the classroom, and we're providing open-ended problem-solving opportunities for all of our students, beginning with kindergarten and working all the way up through 4th grade. So everybody will benefit. If none of my colleagues want to jump in, then I'll say, in addition to detracking, what other diversity, equity, and inclusion priorities is the district implementing at this time, or do you feel like you've addressed that?
I'll add a couple of other things. As I did mention, of course, this is a big part of our current strategic plan. As many of you know, you probably got to see her in person or virtually, I should say, at the last PTO event. We've hired a new executive director for diversity, equity, inclusion, Dr. Jeffrey Ann Wilder. There are a couple of specific priorities that we have for this year and beyond. We have created a Black Teacher Task Force with a real focus on recruiting and retaining teachers and administrators of color. We know that it's really important to have a diverse workforce that is fully representative of our community, and that's an area that we need to grow in. We're also, in the long term, focusing on our curriculum. We have a mechanism by which we do that through our International Baccalaureate framework. We regularly have to self-study or analyze our curriculum and our curricular structures. Over time, I expect that we're going to be looking at our curriculum more closely through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Again, that's something that already is embedded in the IB program, but something that I know we need to give more attention to as well over time.
There's some questions regarding our on-site, remote, and concurrent learning. So we're going to turn to that. And I'm not sure the chat's working tonight. I don't see any questions there yet. So if you're having questions, we're over halfway through. So if you have,
Neil, I was hopeful that it's just because we're answering all of the questions already. But
there you go. All right. So the question was raised: how have teachers been involved in the process of our return to in-person learning? I know we've had a number of teachers here on site for a number of weeks, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I'll start with that, Neil. Having our teachers on site really has made a big difference because we've been able to make adjustments and have a better understanding of things that need to be revised or fixed in classrooms. I mean, we've been able to make adjustments to our technology infrastructure to make sure that all the bandwidth and stuff is working okay. But beyond that, really, we've been talking with teachers throughout the pandemic to make sure that we are collaborating together, that we are figuring out what best solutions make sense. You know, I understand that there are really challenging decisions and discussions that we have to make in the pandemic time that we don't always agree on, honestly. But I think we have gotten to a good point. You know, of course, I say this on the eve of bringing students back, and we wouldn't be able to do that without the hard work of our teachers in preparing classrooms and preparing curriculum and rethinking or re-envisioning again what our curriculum and instruction looks like. And I expect, and I said this, you know, that there will continue to be a learning curve and that we'll have to continue to grow through this together. And then the last thing I would say is it's not just teachers that we are collaborating with, although of course I think teachers are, you know, the ones most directly involved with educating our students. But I talk regularly with community members who are providing input, who have feedback about the processes and structures that we have in place. We work with all of our staff to make sure that we're setting up structures that will be safe and successful. And generally, I believe strongly in collaboration with lots of different stakeholders to move our work forward.
Dr. Glasner, if I could just add, I'm Erin Herbrook. I'm the Director of Primary Education for the district. And I think one thing to keep in mind, another couple of experiences that we've had range from big things, like we did have teachers and work groups all throughout the summer, helping us with decision-making in terms of what the structures could potentially look like when we came back to school, and involved in the decision-making process throughout. In the end, there has to be a decision, though. The other thing I would just share is that we can have as many people in the room as we do and have that many different ideas or answers to the same challenge, or none. An example of that would be, I was meeting with grade level leaders with the principals. So those are one representative from each of our grade levels in each of our schools, to discuss the issue of how we support our substitute teachers who come into our classrooms during this unique concurrent learning time. And with a group of individuals that we all on this call know are extremely intelligent, we were challenged to find answers to all of the different challenges that come along with, logging in and how they get access to different things and what they can and can't do. So I think that that's also something that to keep in mind, that even if we can identify a problem, there aren't always simple solutions to them, and that sometimes we just have to kind of work through a little bit of the challenge to get to the best possible answer.
I just want to give a shout out to all of our IB coordinators and instructional coaches, because they've been helping teachers learn about and practice concurrent teaching so that they're better prepared for students as they begin arriving over the course of the next few days. So, will the district formally allow families to slide between on-site and remote learning, depending on family travel, subsequent quarantining, or student health symptoms from day to day?
The short answer to that question is yes. The model that we're putting in place does allow for flexibility between on-site and online learning. I do ask that for families, when you make a selection, that is something you commit to. We originally said, I think, 9 weeks when we were planning to go back in a couple of weeks ago. But I would say the end date still stands. I think it's mid-January. I don't have the date off the top of my head. Just because we know consistency whenever possible is important. That said, we want to make sure we are meeting every family's needs. And if a family, for example, tries on-site learning or tries online learning and sees that it's not meeting their students' needs, I certainly encourage you to reach out to your building principal, and we will do our best to work with you. Also, we know that there are going to have to be situations where everybody is fluid. Meaning, if a student needs to quarantine or a staff member needs to quarantine or be isolated because of exposure to the virus, and that there are going to be times where we may have to ask that everybody goes remote for a period of time in a classroom or potentially even in a school building. Hopefully those situations will be few and far between, but it's something that we know we need to be prepared for.
Neighboring school districts have been able to return to in-person schooling, and Shaker has continued for months to go back and forth on those decisions related to in-person schooling. What is it about Shaker that's different from these neighboring districts?
So a couple of things. First of all, we have certainly learned from other districts that have gone in already, that have had students on site. That's been important because we learned about different procedures, protocols, structures that they put in place. I think also Shaker we've really gone above and beyond. I think in this case, while I would have loved to have had students on site much earlier, I also recognize that because we're not the first district to go to have students return on site, we have gotten to see what works and what is successful elsewhere and being able to implement that here. I think we've also taken some additional measures that many districts or some districts maybe have not. Things like ventilation studies, making sure that we have trifold dividers for student desks, additional steps that we've taken that have really, because we really want to make sure that we're creating a healthy and safe environment for all of our students and staff. I think actually in this immediate area, there is definitely a bit of a mixed bag in terms of districts that are on site versus not on site. And I know when I talk with other school districts, It's a conversation that everybody continues to talk about and continues to revise their plans. But like I said, we're excited to have students return on site. We've had some additional time to make sure that everything is ready, and looking forward to all systems being a go tomorrow.
It will be nice having kids back in the building, especially our little kindergartners. I'm excited to see them. So a number of families have brought up the concern around before and after care. Why is it not being offered for on-site students at this time? And is there a plan to offer this in the future?
Yes, we are hopeful that we will be able to offer it in the future. A couple of behind the scenes pieces of information that I'd like to share. We are continuing to work with Champions. Champions has been providing our remote learning site supervision over the past couple of months. And they do have the capacity to eventually run before care and after care. I know there are sometimes questions about why we are not moving, or why we're not continuing to have before care and after care provided by the Shaker Rec department. So far that is a pandemic unique situation, because the rec department doesn't have the staffing capacity to run smaller cohorts of students for before care and after care. But we will certainly continue to talk with the city about having the rec department provide before care and after care in the future. In terms of why we're not offering before care and after care starting, let's say tomorrow or the beginning of next week, for a couple of reasons. First of all, we Champions and the school district need to make sure that all the permitting, all the permits and everything are in place. That does take a little bit of time. And Champions, the national organization, puts in place a great deal of safety and security measures in the pandemic era. So that does take a little bit of time to implement. Also, we really wanted to prioritize, we felt it was necessary to prioritize having students in during the regular school day first, see how that goes, and then slowly add additional services and opportunities like before care and after care. I'll just give one brief example of why this could be important. In our current model at the K-4 level, students are in pods or cohorts. You know, they really spend all of their time with their one class. With before care and after care, we know that we would be cross-pollinating, so to speak, the pods of students. And that may be something we can do down the road, but we really wanted to see how our current model is implemented, give that some time before introducing before care and after care. It is definitely something that we expect to offer in the future. We're not sure exactly when, but hopefully in the not too distant future, and we're in regular touch with Champions about making that happen. So one ask that I would have is if before care and after care is something that you are interested in, or that you know somebody else who is interested in, if you could please let your building principal know, or I know we had an interest survey form on our website. Aaron or principal, you may know if that's still up. If not, please again, reach out to your principal, because it's helpful for us to have a good grasp of how many families would like to participate in before care and after care.
All right. Given that the model the district is employing, concurrent learning, seems to be different than the original model announced over the summer, what, if any, metrics will be used to assess the effectiveness of this approach to on-site and online learning versus other models?
You know, our understanding of assessments and metrics, or our use of them, I should say, has really been turned a little bit upside down over the past 7 months, because many of the metrics that we typically use to assess student progress, you know, we haven't been able to administer, or haven't been able to administer as well or as easily. Those include assessments, local internal assessments, state assessments, performance tasks, and other projects. We do make sure we're keeping close track of attendance. We're also, as we move forward, we will be keeping track of assessment data, whether that is classroom specific assessment data, or school data, or grade level data. You know, generally, we also rely on our teachers. Our teachers have great relationships with students and do have a pretty good grasp of where students are, what their needs are, and how engaged they are in learning. I know at the beginning of this year, I think all of our K-4 teachers, if I'm not mistaken, had individual conversations with students and families. That was to really start the year by establishing that relationship and getting to know students well, so that we do have a good grasp, even in this, whether it's a concurrent teaching model or a remote teaching model or any other kind of model, we know where our students are at and what kind of supports they need. But it is something that we're going to be continuing to look at and strengthening as we implement the concurrent teaching model.
And a question just came in. I think you may have addressed it. Have we given thought to as to how we will understand how effective concurrent instruction will and can be, and our additional resources? This is the part we may need to address. Technology staffing being provided to support concurrent instruction. What's the average on-site remote breakdown now?
I'll try to tackle a bunch of those.
Yeah, and I think I can just jump in on the latter part there.
Go for it.
We do have what are called remote learning partners that you should have been seeing during remote learning times. And those, as much as possible, are continuing during our move to concurrent instruction, so that teachers will have that support as much as possible. The average on-site remote breakdown just varies from class to class. There's one class at Boulevard anyway, where one student has opted to go online, but it's on average, it's more like 4 or 5 to 6 students per class. And I see some nods from my colleagues around the board there. So another question that came in, what is the threshold of sick this year? As a parent, I'd rather be extra safe than sorry and keep a child home. On days like that, when you know your child could make it through the day with a few sniffles or whatever, is it okay to keep them home and do virtual if they're on an on-site family? I think our community needs to really work together this year and err on the side of safety. And I agree.
I agree. One of the reasons why we have implemented a health screening app is to make sure that people have a chance to just check their children before they send them to school. The way I think about it is, it's not just a time to check your children, it's also a time to do a gut check, kind of a conscience check, because, we know normally, I think many of us are guilty of this, we send our students to school even if they may not be feeling 100%. With COVID-19 and with symptoms being so common, especially in colder weather, we really ask that if your children are experiencing any symptoms that are listed on that health screening app, that you do keep them home. It will help everybody in the long run, even if it might be more challenging in the short term. And I should add, of course, when your child is home, they can definitely participate in the concurrent, in the live streaming classes, so they would not be missing instruction.
Yes. There's a question here about the school hours that changed from a regular school year. A release time at 1:45 makes it very challenging to work a full day for those of us single parents who work full time. So can you please explain why the additional change?
Yeah, we recognize that there are some challenges that the new schedule presents. There are lots of different things that we had to balance out, transportation times, lunch times, on-site times versus online times, times for students to have additional support at all of our different grade levels. We do know that there has been some talk in our community for a while about trying to have primary students come in earlier and secondary students come in a little bit later. I think developmentally, there's a general consensus that that makes sense. But we also know that some of the schedules that we're putting in place now, we will continue to revisit over the course of, well, as we plan for the post-pandemic. Dr. Herbrook, if you have anything to add, or any principal, if you have anything to add, please feel free. But that's some of the thinking behind the decisions. Like I said, we know that there are some challenges that come with that, and hope as the pandemic, we move past the pandemic, we'll be able to address those.
I think you've covered it nicely, Dr. Glasner.
Final question that I have, with the start of in-person learning beginning tomorrow with our kindergartners, can you walk us through various scenarios which would compel the district to suspend in-person learning? For example, if there's a positive case in the district, would an entire classroom have to quarantine? And at what point rather, would the district suspend all in-person learning?
So this is a conversation that continues to evolve. It's evolved over the past few months. One of the things that we learned from other school districts and then working with the Cuyahoga County Board of Health is that we really make those decisions on a COVID-19 case by COVID-19 case basis. So by that, I mean, we really try to identify or isolate the specific segment or part of our district that we can to minimize or eliminate the risk of exposure. So that might mean that we have to quarantine a classroom at times, or at the secondary level, a team of athletes. It may mean that a teacher has to quarantine at times, but typically what we've seen so far, and which I expect will continue, is that we try not to close the whole district down unless there are really extenuating circumstances. We even will likely try not to close down a whole building. But again, it depends on each case that we get, the circumstances around each case. We do know that there will be positive cases or presumed positive cases. We've already experienced some of those. We know that there will be more that happen. And we will try to keep consistency as much as possible, but we also know that there's going to have to be flexibility on everybody's part, and that there are going to be times where we have to ask students and staff sometimes to go remote for a period of time to make sure that we're kind of reducing or eliminating exposure to a potential case.
Very good. At this time, that is the questions that I had. So if there's anyone out in the audience who would like to either type a question or unmute, we have time for a couple more.
Hi, so can I please ask a quick question?
Please.
So as you mentioned about the aftercare, about champions will be providing in future, but it would be great or very helpful for us if you can give us some timeline so we can adjust our schedule accordingly, or we can find some alternate arrangements till that time.
I can say something on here, but please don't hold me exactly to this date, only because I know we're still having conversations. I believe we will likely, we're working towards around the first or second week of January being able to offer before care and aftercare. Just given the timing around some permits and other stuff that we have to have in place, that's our best guess right now. If that changes drastically, we'll be sure to communicate that. We haven't communicated anything yet, only because there's still a lot of unknowns in that, but that's kind of where we're aiming for right now.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
And do know that if you're a family who is stuck without daycare until you find something, you know your child is welcome to attend online. We are continuing that. Any last questions for Dr. Glasner? I will say, if you haven't had a chance to download the COVID screening app yet, please do so. It's very simple to do. It just takes a few minutes. I even did it, so if I can do it, any of you on here can do it. Is there any discussion of winter break?
We're having it. I'm not sure that if the question was whether or not we're having it. We are planning to have it. I know, you know,
follow-up. Do you see that, Dr. Glasner? Okay, very good.
that I don't see it, but I assume the question is also like what happens after winter break.
2 weeks doesn't give enough time to quarantine after travel.
Yeah, you know, like with Thanksgiving and other holidays, we really ask families to think about different ways of celebrating or taking vacations this year. We do have a travel advisory alert protocol in place. It changes every week, but if you go to a high incident state, then you are required to quarantine before coming back into our school buildings. But again, you know, this goes back to, this is going to be a community effort. Please don't do things that will spread the virus. So please keep that in mind. We're not right now planning to make any adjustments to our school calendar to allow for additional time for quarantine or anything like that. But again, please keep safety in our schools in mind when you make your plans for winter break.
And just to piggyback on that, so if these are tough decisions families are having to make, so if you do travel, I assume then that if you, we don't want you sending your child back early, you could attend online as well, and please make those difficult decisions so to keep everyone safe, as Dr. Glasner said.
Yep.
Any other questions before we wrap up for this evening? This is called teacher wait time. You learn it in teacher training school. Well, Dr. Glasner, I just want to thank you sincerely for spending this time with us this evening. I speak for everyone in thanking you for the open conversation tonight, your candid conversation, and thanks too to everybody who joined us this evening. Again, I want to thank the PTO and community builders, and just thank you all for being here. We will look forward to connecting with you all again soon. So thank you.
Everybody have a good night.
Take care.
Thank you.